You might also get a question like this: transform flat list to nested list. And this is some super real stuff. Typically from the backend you are getting all data as a flat list. And typically this data can have children from one another, which actually means for us in the frontend it is not comfortable to render this data. We can't simply go with for loop because we have children. We need first of all to render only root levels and then for every single element find its children and render them. This is why typically you want to transform your data from flat list to nested list only once. And this is exactly what we must do in this video. As you can see here, we have our flat list and every single element is an object. We have unique ID, some name and parent ID. And for us, first of all, ID is important because this is our unique identifier, and secondly, parent ID. And it can be either ID of another item, for example, like here parent ID 1, this is this item. So this object is a parent of this item. And secondly, parent ID can be null if this is a root element and it doesn't have a parent. So as you can see here, we have two root elements with ID1 and ID2. Now we have ID3, which is a child of parent ID1. So this is the second level. This is why the name here is level 2 item 3. So you understand the leveling. Now we have ID4, which is parent ID3, which actually means this is a child of this element. And actually this parent ID3 is this. This is why it's level 3 item 4. And here we have ID5, which is actually a child of parent ID2, which means this item. And actually this is how we're typically getting data from the backend. Now we must transform it in such format. So we have a flat array with just root elements. So as you can see here, we have two objects, object with ID1 and object with ID2, because they are both root elements and their parent ID is null. Now inside we have a new property children, and this is exactly children which are mapped inside. And here as you can see we have ID3 and also children inside, because actually ID4 is nested inside ID3. And exactly the same we have here. We have inside ID2 children and here ID5 and children. And I omitted here names because they are not important for understanding, but obviously you can have all additional properties here. And as you can see in the last level, when you don't have any children, then we're getting here children empty array. So our task now is to transform flat list to nested list. And as I already said previously, for some people it is much easier to just write the points, how they will solve it, and then just code it. This is why let's try to do it now. So first of all, I will write here to do what we are doing. The first point is to get root elements, because this is what we want to render. Let's write it just like this, get root elements. So we must have an array of our root elements. The second point is to check all children and understand if our root elements have children. If no, then we simply return empty array. If yes, then we need recursively to find children. And we must do it recursively because we need to check every single element and check if it has children. So we can write here something like this: check children if they have children. And now the next point will be if not, then we just return item with empty children. And number 4 here is if yes, then we want to go to number 2, which actually means we're making number 2 recursively until we're at the end of our elements. Now let's try to write the code. So first of all, I want to assign it to our nested list. And what I want to do, I want to take our flat list and find only root elements. And for this we can just use filter, because we want to find all elements where our parent ID is null. In this case we can simply say that we have our item and item.parentID equals null. So we're good to go. Let's check this out. I'm reloading the page and now we have our nested list. As you can see, we have our array of objects and here we have ID1 and ID2 because their parent IDs are null. This is exactly what we wanted. After this, I want just to write .map and inside the function add children. Why I'm doing like this? Because actually this function will be called recursively. and it should be a completely stateless function, which actually means we must call this function on any item and it must work. This is why I want to create here our addChildren function, and we're getting here an item. We don't need anything else because here we have our flat list on the top. If you don't have it available on the top, then maybe you can get here a second argument, a flat list in your code, but it will be in your real project. Here we have access to our flat list. So what we're doing here, we're looping through our root elements and we're mapping addChildren, which actually means we want to add children to every single root element. So first of all, we must find our children. So let's write here children, and we know that our children is just flat list which is filtered by parent ID where ID equals item.id. So let's do this now. We simply take flat list.filter, and here we have our child. And let's name it, for example, child item, and we want to check child item dot parent ID equals, in our case, item.id. In this case, we are finding all our children. Let's console log what we have here. So I'm just writing children and reloading the page. And as you can see here, we got one single element because this is a child of our root element with ID 1. And here we have also one more child of root element with parent ID 2, which actually means it is working correctly. The next point is to check if we have any children. So here we can write if our children length bigger than 0, then we must do our recursive magic, because we need not only get children of children, but we must do it recursively. What I want to do before, I want to create a property let with our nested children. And I want to assign here empty array, because actually if we are not inside this if, then we don't need to change anything, we simply need to return empty children. And as you can see, I assigned by default empty array here, so we can return here object assign, and here I am writing empty object, then comma item, comma, and here is our children, nested children. Why I wrote like this? Because actually if you will use here push or just with dot, you assign it here our nested children, then you will mutate the item, which actually means you will change this item inside flat list. Because we have an object reference. We don't want this, we simply want to return new data. This is why I'm using here object assign with empty object. After this we're using our item, so we copy all properties of our item inside this new object, and we're assigning here new property children, which is our nested children. And in this case we simply have just let nested children empty object. Let's check this out. I'm reloading the page. Here is our nested list, and as you can see we have now children empty array, because actually we didn't write any logic for this if. This is why we simply return data in such format: ID, name, parent ID, actually all fields, and additionally children. And as you can see we have here only root elements, which actually means everything is working correctly, and we must just call recursively here our code. So what we want to do here, we want to loop through every single child and call addChildren function on this child. So we can assign here our nested children, and this is just our children.map, and we have access to every single child, and we are calling addChildren with our child. So what is happening in this case? For example, we found a child, we are checking here, okay, we have a child inside children, and here we are mapping through our array, and for every single element we are calling addChildren. Most important part, that we are calling this function recursively. First of all, we called it here inside root element. Now here inside the children, we are calling it with map. And when we are calling it here, we are checking children of this child, which actually means it will go recursively until we don't have any children, and we are just not going to this if condition. So for example, in our case here, we are calling it 3 times. First of all for ID1, then for ID3, and then for ID4. And this is exactly why we need recursion here. Let's check this out. I'm reloading the page. Let's check our nested list. And as you can see, we have now children. And inside item 1, we have just one child with ID 3. And we also have a children property inside. And we have one more child here, level 3 item 4. And we have children empty array. Because actually our recursion ended. And we simply got here empty children and we assigned them here. So once again, first of all, we must get only our root elements. Secondly, we must create a function which we can call recursively on any element. And this is our addChildren. Now inside the children, we are first of all trying to find all children of the item. And secondly, we are checking if we need to make recursion for our children, if we have any. If yes, then we are calling addChildren recursively. If no, we simply make an object assign and we're returning here our children. So this is how you typically do it in the real project.